Hey gang, ready to upgrade your denim game for the fall? Our friends at Mott & Bow make premium quality jeans. I've never had a pair of jeans that were so comfortable without having to break them in. Plus, they look way better than mall jeans. And Mott & Bow has a free try-on program. You get 2 sizes to try at home, keep the one that fits, and send the other one back for free. These jeans are already priced under market because they cut out all the retail markups, but the deal is even better. When you go to mottandbow.com and use promo code Harris for 20% off, that's MOTTANDBOW.com, promo code Harris. Let's get to the show.
It's the Harris Football Podcast with your host, Christopher Harris.
Welcome in. I am Chris Harris. This is the Harris Football Podcast. Thank you for listening. Before we get going, I wanted to mention on Thursday evening, an hour before game time for Broncos Chiefs, I'm going to be doing a live video Q&A. I will tweet the link, but you can also just tweet directly to me right now at Harris Football, and I will make sure to send you the link personally and directly. These live events are fun. We had one on Sunday. There's going to be trivia and prizes, and I think a way for you to play in a DraftKings league against me. So make a note right now on your calendar. Thursday night, an hour before game time, you will see me answering your questions.
Today's kickoff.
On today's show, I will get to some NFL news that may influence fantasy strategy. Then we'll move on to Flexual Healing, in which I take your questions about your fantasy flex spot, offer advice, but hopefully do it in such a way that gives recommendations that are aimed at helping the widest array of folks, basically talking about players who figure to be key pressure points in deciding on your flex. We have a Thursday night preview and a voicemail that was left at Sunk by a Hug. And then Craig Clark will hop aboard and we'll talk DFS strategy for Week 2. We're brought to you today by BetDSI.com, the online sportsbook where I play. You may remember a couple weeks ago I mentioned I had a 3-team parlay for Week 1, and it hit. I had Bills covering against Colts, Packers against Bears, and then the big drama, the over in Giants-Cowboys, that didn't hit until the very end. Anyway, it's very fun to play, especially when you win. And BetDSI is a great place to do it. They're one of the original online books. They've been around for 16 years. They're known for helping set the lines. They're dedicated to being accessible. The website is always up. It's a company that always pays when you want your winnings, and they get an A+ on many sportsbook reviews. Go to BetDSI.com right now, set up an account, and use the promo code Harris10, and you'll get $10 for free within a couple hours put into your account to play with. Tonight's game on BetDSI has the Chiefs as a 3-point favorite, so if you're looking for a place to play, go there now, BetDSI.com, promo code Harris, no space, the number 10.
Injury news.
So the Saints aren't promising that C.J. Spiller will return for Week 2, though at the moment, I've still got him ranked, considering, it seemed like he might have been relatively close for the opener. Obviously, he's C.J. Spiller, so he inherently brings a lot of risk. Plus, you'll want to stay tuned to my Twitter feed this weekend to see if we can get more conclusive news about his availability. It sounds like Trey Mason has been cleared to return to the Rams lineup, which puts a dent in the idea of Benny Cunningham as a sleeper against Washington. Of course, it's no certainty until we hear Mason is active on Sunday morning, and if you tune in to that Sunday morning live Q&A of mine, I will tell you all the inactives, plus tell you what they mean for your lineup. But assuming that Mason is out there, I put him 28th among running backs in a standard league, Cunningham 39th. Attractive matchup for sure, just don't know how the workload will break down. It sounds like Todd Gurley once again won't go. Delaney Walker has a sprained ligament in his wrist, which doesn't mean he's been ruled out for Week 2, but he's no sure thing. Another case where we'll know when the inactives come out. But Walker owners definitely need to have another tight end available just in case. And one of my flag players, Lorenzo Taliaferro, could return for Week 2, which might put the kibosh on Buck Allen. Even though Justin Forset's dealing with a shoulder thing, he'll play against the Raiders, and it looks like an awfully good matchup for him, so I wouldn't be surprised to see him, get right back on track after a horrendous Week 1. The ancillary Ravens running backs probably aren't startable at the moment, but I will, as ever, have my eye on Taliaferro. You've heard me talk a couple times about the video Q&As that I'll be doing Thursdays and Sundays, an hour before kickoff. And you may have seen on Sunday I had some trivia questions and gave away a little bit of swag, and I'm going to tell you how I'm going to send that swag via Stamps.com. I am done actually going to the post office. It takes too long. And the little podcast that could keeps me pretty busy with Stamps.com. I can literally do anything I can do at the post office right from my desk. I buy and print official U.S. postage for any letter or package using my own computer and printer. Unlike the post office, Stamps.com never closes, so I can get postage whenever I need it 24/7. Right now, if you use my offer code, Harris, you get a 4-week trial plus a bonus offer that includes a free digital scale and up to $55 in free postage. Don't wait. Go to Stamps.com, and before you do anything else, click on the microphone at the top of the homepage and type Harris. That's Stamps.com. Enter Harris. All right, let's do some Flexual healing. Incidentally, I am accepting theme songs. If someone out there with a karaoke machine wants to do a modified lyrics version of Flexual healing using the old Marvin Gaye song, you can feel free. Martin Stiles asks on Twitter, at Harris Football, half point per reception, Gore or Danny Woodhead? I just expect Gore to have an upside that might not really exist. All right, so let's take this as an opportunity to talk about Gore, and then we'll get to some other Woodhead questions. Yes, I would still be playing Gore, even though, like Week 1 against the Bills, Week 2 against the Jets, another tough matchup for a running back. And Gore didn't do us any favors last week, missing time with calf cramps and, not getting that many carries in a game where the Colts were playing catch-up. But you can't say there's no upside after just one game. The Colts have a great offense. I expect Gore to be a big part of that offense. Fantasy's largely about touchdowns for right or for wrong, and I'll take the clear starting running back on a team that, I think most weeks, even against a good defense, should score a lot of touchdowns. Some more Danny Woodhead questions. He was literally the most asked about player when I solicited your flex questions on Twitter and Facebook. Marshall Teach asks, Aguilar or Woodhead for standard? Kelly Krieger asks, PPR, Woodhead, Stevie Johnson, Kendall Wright, or Darren Sproles? Joshua Lee, PPR, assuming Mike Evans plays, do I play a possibly hurt Evans or Danny Woodhead? All right, so on Wednesday's show, Brandon Funston and I spent a while discussing why we're not as optimistic as some regarding Woodhead having every week value. He is, I think, in both of our minds, not a full-time back, and Melvin Gordon eventually will be. Maybe not in the next couple of weeks, but eventually I think he will be, and that explains why I have Woodhead as my number 34 running back in the Standard League and number 32 in a PPR. Of course, if you're looking at my ranks and want to compare a running back to a wide receiver, there's a little art to go with the science. In the case of Evans, I have him in the early 20s, so it's safe to say I'd probably go Evans over Woodhead. Though, if Joshua, the fellow who asked that question, is risk-averse and just, doesn't want to mess with Evans's hammy at all, I get it. I think that's a philosophical question. I don't think it's wrong to feel that way. In the case of Aguilar, I've dipped him quite a bit lower than the early 30s in my receiver ranks, so I'll be rolling with Woodhead in that comparison. It's not to say Aguilar won't be useful at some point, but as I said on Tuesday's show, watching the Eagles rotate those outside receivers makes you think Aguilar has something to prove before you feel great about plugging him into your lineup. And as for Kelly's question, let's hit on Sproles for a second, because he's probably odd man out for me. The case of Sproles and the case of Woodhead, not that dissimilar. Smaller guys with good quickness who bring a spark on occasion, but you worry that the full-time workload can just never be there for them. The difference, of course, is that Sproles really seems to have no chance to be a running option near the goal line, unlike Woodhead. So for me, he's lower. That explains why he's lower, even in my point per reception ranks, even despite a great week one. As for the question of where Woodhead stacks up compared to point per reception options in the neighborhood of Stevie Johnson and Kendall Wright, well, that's the right neighborhood for me. If you're trying to map my running back and wide receiver ranks in a PPR onto each other, I think I might play Woodhead to see if I can steal another short touchdown, but I think in that neighborhood, that's a trust your gut special. D'Angelo Williams, another much asked about player this week when it comes to flexes. It's almost hard to remember how surprising his output was because that first Thursday game seems so long ago. A few illustrative examples for D. Willie include questions from Jorge Lopez. Should I start D'Angelo Williams or Stevie Johnson in a standard league? Steve Cross, D'Angelo's last bell cow ball, or Steve Smith. Jeff Forshee says Decker or D'Angelo Williams. Constantine Leontios says D. Willie or Nelson Aguilar. All right, so again, my goal here is, I'm going to try to answer the specific questions, but for everyone who is not one of those four people, I want to help out anyone who's considering D. Willie as a flex and try to get him sort of into the right neighborhood so they can make decisions with the players that they actually own. So we're going to compare Williams with Stevie Johnson, Steve Smith, and Eric Decker. And I already mentioned, Aguilar. He's probably out of this neighborhood for me. So not Aguilar, Constantine. In a standard league, I have Williams 23rd among running backs. After 1 week, my guess is that the Niners' run defense looks better than the Patriots' run defense did. Especially in the first half of that game last Thursday, Williams had some seriously huge holes to run through. I think Steve Smith is a tough call against Williams. He's 27th on my wide receiver list, but there are an awful lot of good wide receivers, and Smith has some downside because of how that Ravens passing game looked last week, but he's got real upside against a banged-up Raiders secondary. That's almost a perfect pressure point for me. I think that's a 50-50 one right there. D'Angelo Williams, Steve Smith, that's about where I would map those guys onto each other in the two ranks if I were going to rank flex plays. I don't think there's a wrong answer. Michael Williams if I needed my team to be sure to get something, and Smith if I wanted upside. I have Stevie Johnson 36 and Decker 39th, and obviously they both score touchdowns in week one, so it's not like it would be dumb to start them over D. Willie, but I probably go with the starting running back who looked good in week one. After Amir Abdullah made a couple electric plays last week and scored a touchdown, he's cropping up in a bunch of flex decisions for week two, and rightly so. Chris Santos says Devontae Adams or Amir Abdullah. Fantasy News says Abdullah or Vincent Jackson. Simon Wright says Brandon Marshall or Abdullah. So I talked with the fantasy footballers on Monday's show. Again, if you haven't listened to my tape review, I hope you will go back and listen to Monday and Tuesday because I think you'll have a much better impression of my full scope of what I think about players because I watched all the tape and reported what I saw. But yeah, Abdullah was good. He had some impressive runs. Game situations led to no goal line carries, so we don't know if Joique Bell is actually still the goal line guy. I still, for the moment, view it as a pretty even platoon with two good players, though I acknowledge Abdullah is the home run threat, and Bell's never going to be that. I have Abdullah 21st in my standard ranks, Bell 24th for this week, against a Vikings defense that just helped Carlos Hyde look like Superman. I have Brandon Marshall 15th in my receiver ranks. So I think I play Marshall. That feels like the crossover point where we haven't reached it yet. I get it that Vontae Davis we may see him against Marshall, but Marshall got a touchdown against Joe Hayden last week. It feels to me like I would play him. Devontae Adams is 18th in my receiver ranks. The Seahawks would historically be a no-go for a young receiver, but they didn't exactly impress in week 1. And Vincent Jackson has to deal with the rookie quarterback, and Mike Evans coming back, and Jackson is 22nd in my receiver ranks. In those two comparisons, I might land on Abdullah's upside. I don't think there's a wrong answer. I think we found that's right about where the crossover point for me is for Abdullah. I'd say if you're comparing Abdullah to a receiver in that neighborhood, I think trusting your gut is a fine strategy. I talked about Woodhead and his backfield mate. Melvin Gordon is also apparently a big topic of flex distress. That almost rhymes. Eddie Reiter asks Mike Wallace or Melvin Gordon, and Sam Baker asks Melvin Gordon or Cole Beasley in a PPR. So I get the worry on Gordon. Woodhead, we talked about a bunch already. He looks like the better bet to give you short touchdowns, and otherwise it's a platoon. But, as I've mentioned a couple times now, Gordon almost had a great touchdown run on which his elbow was ruled down in week 1, and we would probably be less concerned about him if he hadn't quite put that elbow down on the turf. I thought he looked pretty good overall. He's my number 29 running back in standard, 33 in PPR. So for Mike Wallace, that's basically the crossover. I think Wallace has an okay chance to make a big play. Maybe he gets some Rasheed Mathis on him. That would be a good thing. But I also believe in Gordon's ability to get you something, whereas Wallace kind of has to hit you that home run. So maybe your decision comes down to what your team needs. As for Beasley, I get that it's a PPR, and it's pretty easy to talk ourselves into the idea that with no Dez, the Cowboys could feed Beasley a ton of targets, but I think I'd like to see it once first and get a sense of what the Cowboys solution will be before I promote any of the receiving weapons way above their natural level. So I do think it would be Gordon for me. And one last one here that will help me get to a larger point. Chris M. Michel asks, in a league where I can play a quarterback at flex, should I use Travis Kelce or Tom Brady? I've seen a lot of questions where people are trying to do two things. A, justify not putting a quarterback into their flex spot, and B, justify getting Kelce or Eifert into their lineups at all cost. So part A, first of all, if your league has a flex that allows a quarterback, stop outthinking yourself, play the quarterback. Can a tight end get you 2 touchdowns? I think last week proved that it can. He can. But, how many weeks over the course of a season do you think even a pretty good tight end is going to outscore Tom Brady? It's not going to be too many. And then part B, as for the tight ends who had a nice week 1, I want you to try and hear me over the sound of the blood rushing to your ears in excitement. This is what tight ends do. They blow up unexpectedly and then retreat back into the muck. I'm not saying Kelce or Eifert is going to stink in week 2, but I'm saying neither of them belongs close to the Gronk-Graham territory, that category, until they do it several weeks in a row. Yes, at tight end, you play them. And if you've got crummy other options at flex, cool. You can flex a tight end. But if you're comparing Kelce to, like Odell Beckham because he struggled for 1 week, I would say do not go there yet.
Thursday night preview.
It feels like a little bit of a referendum on the Broncos tonight. Maybe a little bit of a rough spot. They're coming off a game in which the Ravens, they have an impressive front seven, and they sent the kitchen sink at the line of scrimmage and dared Peyton Manning to beat them on deeper stuff. And, I think the Chiefs are maybe even better equipped to try that same strategy. Obviously, 1 week doesn't make a whole season, and it's highly possible for an offensive line to get better, but if Denver's blocking isn't better Thursday night, that offense is going to sputter in a similar way. I do have Peyton low this week. He's 11th on my quarterback list, even though I don't think it's all him, and I believe he can still throw it fine, given time. I think he used Demaryius Thomas no matter what, as we didn't get to see him be his beastly self in the open field, but that's coming. Emmanuel Sanders, same thing. Too dangerous to make that one big play that makes your week. C.J. Anderson, interesting test case. I lowered him, but only to RB 14, while I still only have Ronnie Hillman at RB 37. But Anderson has a toe problem, and obviously the Broncos aren't going to go out of their way to tell us how bad that toe problem is. The way we'll know it's bad is if Anderson comes out tonight and basically platoons with Hillman or even takes a back seat to Hillman. So if you prefer to remove risk altogether and have other options at running back, I get it. The Chiefs, they're a squad where, other than Jamal Charles, there probably aren't too many fantasy teams that drafted a bunch of Kansas City players really high to the point where you feel guilty if you don't play them, or you don't have a lot of alternatives. I've talked about Travis Kelce as a shallow league flex just a few minutes ago. Flex, it's a question. As a tight end, duh. Let's see what he can do running back out there. Jeremy Maclin, tough task in what looks like a really good, Broncos defense against him. And I have both my defenses, both of tonight's defenses rated inside my top 6 for this week. But Maclin, I still think we're going to see some good stuff from him. If he's the second best receiver talent-wise on my roster, I think I probably haven't seen enough yet to cause me to bench him. Alex Smith, listen, you know what you're probably getting. It won't be as tasty as last week. He'll probably get you right around 13 or 14 fantasy points because that's what Alex Smith does.
Time for the mailbag.
Devontae Morgan Freeman apparently takes requests because I asked him for a voicemail yesterday, and he delivered.
This is Devontae Morgan Freeman. I'm so happy to see the little podcast that could fart and whistle its way to the top of the iTunes charts. Much like Ashley Judd, I consider this podcast my extended family. And while my voice is sage and wise, it is my family that makes me smarter, makes me better, and makes my butt a genius.
Morgan Freeman's genius butt. I think the gauntlet has been thrown down. Make those voicemails better, because Devontae Morgan Freeman is kicking y'all's genius butts.
Today's guest.
And today's guest is our DFS expert, Craig Clark. How are you doing, Craig?
I'm doing very good. I go to your website quite a bit now for the ranks when I'm conflicted in DFS.
Well, it's our website, of course, because Craig also is writing a blog for DFS strategy if you're playing DraftKings or FanDuel. He's got a piece up there for you, also writing some stuff for Vice Sports. He's quite the man about town, although his Twitter handle, which is at PCClark59, is not perhaps the most memorable Twitter handle I've ever seen, Craig.
Yeah, it is what it is. I could keep changing it, but I'll never get better. I'll keep doing it wrong.
All right, man. Well, you're starting to respond to a lot of folks on Twitter, and I know they appreciate it, so follow Craig at PCClark59. Craig, of course, we're getting a slightly late start compared to the scheduled time we planned on to record this segment, and can you tell the folks why that is?
It was lawnmowers?
It was, in fact, the lawnmowers. And
they sounded like helicopters.
They do sound like helicopters in my house. All right, so let's get right into week 2 DFS strategy. But before we get to week 2, actually, how'd you do with our week 1? I know how I did in week 1. Wasn't that great? How about you?
Wah, wah. But yeah.
But learned so much.
Yeah, I played 5 tickets. I played 50-50 and the big prize pool on every ticket, which isn't necessarily the greatest strategy, but that's what I did. And some of my tickets won. They won both, and the rest of the tickets lost. I ended up in the red. In the red.
Yeah, I needed Sam Bradford to do more than he did on Monday night, and I needed Julio Jones not to go completely bananas.
Yeah, he moved the 50-50 line big time. That game had a lot of percent utilization, a lot of ownership in that game.
Yeah. So, tell me who the key players were. I think we have a sense of who they were, but for the winning teams in the general prize pool last week.
Yeah, there were some good things that came out of it in that you didn't have to have a perfect ticket to win. You didn't have to have any single player to win.
Okay.
But you had to have Forte or Hyde. You had to have basically two of Allen, Julio Jones, and DeAndre Hopkins. You had to hit on one of those great tight ends. Some dudes had, they had one of the tight ends in their tight end slot and one in the flex, and you're like, jerk!
That is not a good strategy in general, right? But this was the weekend of like 19 touchdown tight ends or something, 19 tight ends who scored touchdowns.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to happen again nearly so much.
No, the Kelsey Eifert thing, basically.
Yeah, right. I don't hate the strategy if you're trying to save money, because you can really save money doing that, putting a tight end in your flex and then having a cheap tight end as tight end. But
I
get
it.
Pennies.
Right, I get it, but aren't there cheap, especially in DraftKings, if you're in a PPR, aren't there just as cheap receivers who we drool over their price?
Yeah, and the price is nice, like Stevie Johnson or even like Brandon Coleman if you're really risky.
Yeah.
Even some running backs like Darren Sproles. I mean, he got you 20 points this week. I'm not saying he will again, but he's 3,500. He's really cheap.
So are we drawing any lessons from the players who wound up being crucial to the GPP winning teams? Or is the lesson pick the right players?
I think it's picking the right players. A lot of the chalk hit this week. When I say chalk, I mean players that we talk about and that other places talk about, such that everybody's saying take Jordan Matthews, right? And Jordan Matthews did well. Chris Ivory did well. Jarvis Landry did well. Even John Brown. John Brown was on either the first or the second ticket, even though he only scored for the first 4 minutes of the game.
Yeah.
He looked great after the first drive. You're like, oh, this guy's going to have 50 points.
Right. So, yeah, okay, so that doesn't always happen. Chalk doesn't always win out. So not a ton of lessons we're going to learn here from week one.
And now we just have one data point. It's different than 0 data points, but it's also equally dangerous.
Sure, confirmation bias and or, the opposite of that. So, all right, well, let's move on to week 2. Are there any of the players who were great and who were part of the winning GPP tickets this past week? Are you viewing any of them as great and potentially key in week 2?
I mean, Forte got a lot of rushes and a decent amount of targets. Hyde less so on the targets, but a whole bunch of touches. I don't see why they won't again.
Yeah.
So I kind of like them. Conversely, I don't know how Keenan Allen does that again. He might. But I can't see the game going that same way. That was just a perfect storm for Keenan Allen to get all those points.
Right. I mean, it'd be one thing if Cincinnati maybe went out and made a trade for Rashean Mathis. Quickly, Lions, send us Rashean Mathis. That would help our defense.
Is he going to do the same thing again this week against Minnesota?
Yeah, I mean, well, the question is then even who would be the receiver who'd be on him, and will the Vikings ever take a chance down the field? Like, there's so many questions about that Vikings offense after that execrable performance, on Monday night, that I wouldn't be able to say either receiver would be able to take advantage. But boy, I mean, I've thought Rashean Mathis was on his last legs for a couple seasons. That was an embarrassment against Keenan Allen, and I think you can draw a straight line. Phillip Rivers is not the quarterback who focuses all his attention on one guy. That's his MO, right? He spreads it everywhere. And the idea that, I'm with you, Allen probably doesn't see it. He's a good player, and he was, let's face it, I was higher on him than anybody, but,
Yeah, you should have gone with your preseason likes so much. Forte and Allen, and, that would have been a ticket.
It would have. But, I'm not really investing big on the GPP. It's not my style, man. I'm pretty conservative. I'm not like a crazy Craig Clark.
Well, you could have won the 50-50.
Double my money, which I didn't. I donated to the pool this time around. All right, so I assume this week 1 has not deterred you, and your plan is once again to build multiple tickets.
Yeah.
Okay. So for week 2, who are your tentpole players? Who are the players who are going to be on all of your cards?
I'm finding I really like Mark Ingram.
Okay. Ingram against Tampa Bay, right? A home game. CJ Spiller coming back. And so in DraftKings, you might worry fewer receptions.
Right. He had, 8 or 9?
Yeah. He proved he could do it.
Had a bunch too.
Right. He proved he could do it, though.
Mm-hmm.
So that's good. I mean, Ingram proved he could do it. So maybe that means he doesn't need to come out in all passing type situations, even with Spiller in there. And we don't know what Spiller. I mean, he could literally hurt himself the first play of the game.
Yeah.
So Ingram is on there. Who else?
I like Jordan Matthews again.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he just was 10 passes and had not a phantom touchdown, but a touchdown that was taken by a phantom.
Yeah, I've talked about that, I think, 3 times on the podcast now. That was you can't tell I own Jordan Matthews in La Liga, can you? You're not in La Liga. How did we ever wind up doing this where you're not in La Liga?
I was in China.
Oh, but see, I've asked you since then. We had like a person leave La Liga, and I asked you, and you were like, "No,
Okay.
it's too intense."
Yeah, well, you just caught me at the wrong time. I was doing.
You're just busy with your DFS. That's the problem. It's like
yes.
all that contract stuff. You don't have time for it. So yeah, Jordan Matthews deserved a touchdown. I agree, and I agree he looks rock solid again. What did his price wind up doing on the
I think it's 7,100. It went up a little bit.
Yeah.
But DraftKings, the prices. They're like stuck in their ways with how they thought it was initially. They didn't move the prices as much as you thought they would.
And Matthews' FanDuel price went up a little bit more, I guess.
Yeah, Matthews went up. Keenan Allen went up a lot. Carlos Hyde went up more. There's in FanDuel, Carlos Hyde is still like the 16th or 17th running back, but it's so compressed, the salaries.
Right.
Whereas 5,100 for Carlos Hyde in DraftKings, they're just begging everybody to take him.
I know, and I rolled with him. We'll talk about my 50-50 team in a minute, but I definitely rolled with him. So we got Jordan Matthews. Anybody else who's going to be on all your cards, other tentpole guys for you?
I am hitting a lot of Jason Witten.
All right.
Are you finding on the ticket that I published, but I'm finding I think they need him and they're going to use him. I know Philadelphia's going to try to take him away, but just going to see what happens.
Right. So where's Witten's value? What's his price, first of all?
I think it's like 4,300, something like that. So in that ballpark. It's expensive for a tight end.
Right, expensive, but not the most expensive.
It's not 7,300 for Gronk.
Right. So when we come to somebody who's on the pricier side of his position range, I'm remembering your advice from last week, which is, that's okay in a GPP, maybe less so in a 50-50 because you rely on him too much relative to what else you can afford. Do you stand by that with Witten?
The tight ends, you're costing yourself $700. It's not as bad with the tight ends.
Okay, so again, price compression means you're not as worried about it. Just pick the guy you want.
Yeah, sometimes, Julio Jones was really expensive, and he was great. So sometimes you got to get the guys if that's your guy.
Right. Well, I don't know if it's my guy. I'll tell you on Monday whether it's my guy. I can't tell you now whether that's my guy. So how about So let me see if I remember correctly. We got Ingram, we got Jordan Matthews, we got Witten. Anyone else who's going to be on all your tickets?
Well, I don't have anybody else that's on all my tickets.
Okay, who are you filling in with then?
I'm filling in, right on your ranks between 10 through 13.
Mm-hmm.
That's where you have Matthews as a wide receiver. You also have Jarvis Landry, Keenan Allen. I don't think he's going to do as well, but 20 points might happen. Maybe not 35. And then that little guy with the funny haircut on New England.
Yeah, I wrote a piece about him. I believe I referred to him as the funny guy, the little guy with the funny haircut. Julian Edelman, we're talking about.
Yeah, maybe that's where I heard it. But all 4 of those guys, I even tried to build a ticket around them. I'm finding myself not able to, but because I also want Forte and Hyde and Ingram and Witten, and I'm starting to like, even though I didn't publish this one, I'm starting to like Drew Brees as well. It seems like a nice matchup. Maybe it may be a narrative with Tampa's terrible offense and Tampa's terrible defense that you just go look at who Tampa's playing.
So how do you feel about that? If you're putting together one of these rosters, whether it's GPP or 50-50 or, cash game, heads up, whatever, and you're thinking of Brees and Ingram. So, we often say that stacking quarterback and wide receiver in commissioner style, that's just fine. We say in DFS, stacking quarterback and wide receiver, maybe even better. We love it if it's viable. But we don't often talk about quarterback and running back because we feel like it caps the upside. There's only so good that combo can do because they kind of steal from one another. How do you feel about that for DFS?
Well, I don't have a problem with it at all. I mean, there's positive correlation and there's negative correlation. So the negative correlation is Drew Brees throws a touchdown pass to
Brandon Coleman.
Cooks. That's bad for Ingram. But there's also a positive correlation. They're both playing the same defense. And if you saw in the San Diego-Detroit game, San Diego's top 6 players all scored. Tennessee's players all scored. Kansas City's players all scored. Eagles players pretty much all scored. So I think having good players helps each other. That's positive correlation. Demaryius Thomas being good helps Emmanuel Sanders and vice versa. And I also think playing the same defense helps players. So I don't have a problem at all with picking whoever you think is going to do well.
I'll offer the contrary viewpoint, which is the same viewpoint I would offer for commissioner style, with which I think I'm a little bit more of an expert than I am with DFS, which is, of course, you're right. It's possible to have your quarterback and running back on the same NFL team be positively correlated, but their ceiling is capped. Like, you're not going to. So if I'm able to pick a quarterback and a running back who are at the tops of their positions on different NFL teams, they have a higher ceiling. If I make right picks,
right,
they have a higher ceiling than Brees and Ingram do together.
Yeah, it's still hard to do that. I mean, you have to do that to win the GPP.
So that's what I'm saying. So for GPP purposes, you would not do Brees Ingram because you're trying to win the GPP.
I still don't have a problem with it. They still play. I understand the argument.
Yeah.
But they're still playing the same defense. And week to week, the correlation is going to be wildly different, which is why I understand on a commissioner style, it's far worse because that correlation is going to even out.
You're saying if you find a week where you're sure that the Saints are going to score 50 points against the Bucs, it's just that one week and you're not living with it for the whole season.
Yeah.
You're saying, I trust that combo better than I trust my ability to find Brees and some other running back who hits a home run.
And there's a lot of points to go around sometimes within the same game. No player is going to get all the points, and that's sort of what the theory is when you want to have them on different players. You want the one guy on this team that's getting all the points, and you want the one guy on this team that gets all the points. Well, the 4 touchdown game is rare.
Right, but my point is that it's out there. There is a Carlos Hyde game out there. So if I had the ability to go Brees Hyde as opposed to Brees Ingram, then the Hyde of last week, that is, then clearly the Brees Hyde is better than the Brees Ingram's ever going to do. But your point is, but you can't tell me Hyde beforehand. You can't tell me the guy who's going to score 4 touchdowns beforehand. That's lucky.
Yeah.
All right, I get your point. I probably won't go quarterback, running back from the same team.
Yeah, I'm a little less nervous of it. I sometimes I've built a ticket with Cincinnati players. I've built a ticket with Pittsburgh players. I've built a ticket with Eagles players. They're so shiny, those Eagles players.
Andy Dalton. I could tell Andy Dalton's going to be on all your teams this week. So anyone else you're filling out your card with this week?
I'm hitting some cheaper players. I got Darren Fells on a couple, and that's really risky. I don't know if Gresham's how much he's going to play, how much he's going to take away from him. I like that Andre Ellington is hurt for that.
I'll tell you, I think Fells would be absolute fool's gold. I think there are going to be enough people who see last week's performance and say, I'll put it on Fells to make it so that you're not alone enough on Fells. And I don't think that aloneness, therefore, will outweigh the risk that he is complete garbage for 4 straight games. I mean, he's not.
And that's highly likely.
Yeah, he's a blocker. I mean, he's essentially a blocker. But, maybe I'm wrong. So let me go through my my DraftKings 50-50 team.
Okay.
Quarterback, I have Matt Ryan. Going against the Giants was not... the Giants did an okay job against the Cowboy pass game, but I think a lot of that was because Dez Bryant broke his foot.
Yeah.
I did go with Hyde and Ivory. I don't know how you can not.
Take Ivory?
They're both they're both so cheap.
Yeah. I'm worried that Ivory's not going to have... they had so many fumbles and turnovers in that game. They had so many extra possessions that he's just not going to get the touchdowns.
Yeah.
He's going to get the work.
All I need is the work. I mean, Bilal Powell did have like 12 touches, I think, in that game, but I think it was the Powell usage that was enhanced by all the Browns' mistakes in that game. So Hyde and Ivory for me. I went in with Antonio Brown. He's the one who I would say, all right, I'm just going to lock him in. I thought about it was basically between him and Julio, and I decided I love Julio, but how many games in a row do I need Brown to be awesome before I just go, okay, I'm going to go Brown.
Right, and the Steelers are at home, and they did so well at home last year.
Yeah, that's a crutch argument that's a bunch of nonsense. And you know it. Edelman.
All right, don't take Brown.
I did. I already took him. Not because he's at home. Edelman, Jarvis Landry, and Stevie Johnson.
Yeah.
So these are going to be widely owned players, but I actually had Terrence Williams in there at the same price as Stevie Johnson. I'm interested in your comparison between those two. They're both at 4,200 in DraftKings.
Yeah.
Stevie Johnson feels like to me should have gone up and didn't go up much. Like you said, DraftKings prices tend to be stickier. I decided to vote against Terrence Williams because I think he'll be one of the 3 or 4 most owned players in all of these formats this week because he's going to be cheap and because everyone's looking for a Dez replacement, and Philly's pass defense didn't look very good against Julio Jones. I kind of want, I actually, in my rankings, I have Terrence Williams a couple spots ahead of Stevie Johnson, but here I felt like maybe it was better strategy. Even though Stevie will be widely owned, I think T. Will be owned more. If you were going to pick between those two at the same price, who would you pick?
I have picked between the two, and I took Terrence Williams. I mean, but those were the two I was picking from, right at that price. I'm like, I got 4,200, and these are the guys.
Yeah. What's your logic? You just don't want to bet against Terrence Williams. You agree that he's going to be incredibly highly owned.
He will be highly owned. I don't know that he'll be Devontae Adams. Last week was 41%.
Yeah, wow.
In the GPP. But I don't think he'll be that high, but he's going to be widely owned. But I bet Stevie Johnson is in the teens. I'm worried that, just the narrative. Again, I know you don't like to go with game flow, but that game's going to be different. That San Diego doesn't have nearly. It doesn't run amok like they did.
Sure, but you don't need them to run amok. I mean, game flow is difficult to predict because you don't know what that Eagle Cowboy. We thought we knew what the Giant Cowboy game flow was going to be.
How about the Broncos game? Oh, I couldn't have picked worse.
Yeah, so we're terrible at picking game flow. It's not you and me. Everyone is terrible at picking game flow. Everybody but Vegas. Vegas is really good at it. So T. Will, I just decided you either voting for. It's like your theory. You either voting for him or you're voting against him.
Yep.
Whether you pick him or you don't pick him, I decided to vote against him. And then I had Jordan Reed, still cheap at tight end, and I have the Dolphins defense, the most expensive defense, but again, they're all so compressed. I'll just take the one playing against Blake Bortles.
Yeah. He threw a nice touchdown to the Panthers last week.
He did. He is maybe not completely fixed of the preseason.
I wonder how long. I mean, I guess they're with him. They're with him for a while, but. You watched the Houston-Kansas City game, and immediately it's like with Hoyer, and you're like, he's not going to have a job for another 10 minutes.
No, but Bortles didn't play much better than that. But you're right; they have to stick with him for a while. So, any thoughts? We tend to focus a lot on DraftKings on these segments because we both play on DraftKings. But any thoughts for folks who are more invested in the FanDuel side of things?
FanDuel, the prices are more compressed; they seem more reasonable. You really need two good running backs in FanDuel. You care a lot less about receptions. You want stud running backs. I mean, again, you can do the Forte Hyde thing. They're priced. Forte is really expensive. Hyde is doable. This week I took Marshawn Lynch and I took Jeremy Hill, two very highly priced but more sort of in the pack running backs rather than paying for Forte.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks for doing this. I hope we both have better luck in week 2 than we had in week 1. Tell folks what they can expect out of your unbelievable Twitter handle.
I'm getting pretty good at responding. You can ask and I'll respond.
And that Twitter handle again is @PCClark59. Hey, thanks for doing it, Craig.
No problem. This is a lot of fun.
And that's our show. Hey, remember to up your denim game by going to mottandbow.com. I don't think I could ever buy mass-produced shopping mall jeans again. These jeans are way too comfortable. And use our offer code Harris, and you'll get 20% off. mottandbow.com, offer code Harris. Remember, tune in tonight, 7:30 p.m. Eastern, and I'll do a live video Q&A. We did one Sunday. It was pretty fun. You can win prizes. And also I'll try and help you both for your Commissioner-style league and your DFS lineup. Plus, I think I'll have a way for you to play on DraftKings against me, which is fun. Thanks again for listening. Enjoy the game tonight, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.
The Harris Football Podcast's opening theme is Under the Gun by Apex Manor. The end theme is Tooth and Claw by OU Villain. Subscribe to the Harris Football Podcast on iTunes and never miss an episode.